Hello, everyone. My name is Anya, and I'm very delighted to be with you today. We're going to learn about something that's quite fascinating. We're going to be looking at good communication and good English. What's the difference? And some helpful tips. That's some good advice on how to communicate well. Okay. Now we're going to think about what is the difference between speaking English and communicating. Can you have good English and bad communication? And can you have bad English and good communication? Well, they may seem like some strange questions to ask, but when we stop and think about it, they are really interesting questions. Let's just go back to those two questions. The first one, can you have good English and bad communication? Well, I want you to imagine a person with excellent English, someone who has good grammar, perfect pronunciation, and wonderful vocabulary. But maybe they didn't prepare their talk very well. Maybe the information is boring or irrelevant to the listeners. And maybe it's very unclear why they are even giving a talk and why it's important. And maybe their information isn't logical or well organized. In other words, they are a bad communicator. Now, let's think about the second question. Can you have bad English and be a good communicator? Well, let's think about a person who has poor grammar, poor pronunciation, and even poor vocabulary. But they are really engaging. Engaging means interesting. The information is clear and fascinating and just what their listeners or audience need. They organize their talk well and convince everyone that what they are saying is very important or very significant. In other words, they are a great communicator, even though they have bad English. Now, I want to give you just one more example. In our family, we had a person called John who had a stroke. A stroke is when you have brain damage, and he wasn't able to talk at all. But he was a great communicator. And you might be thinking, well, how could he communicate if he couldn't speak any words? And the interesting thing is that he communicated through body language. He used facial expressions, hand gestures like pointing, posture, the way he was sitting, and even shrugging his shoulders, moving his shoulders up and down. He communicated his emotions, his appreciation, and his love for his family and grandchildren. And do you know that some people believe that body language is 80% of our communication and words is only 20%? Well, let's move on now to what is good English and good communication. Now, there's lots of things on this list, and I think you already know them. Good English is about good grammar, good understanding, good listening, good writing, good vocab. That means having a range of words that you can use, and good pronunciation, and even good computing skills so that you can make your English clear. So let's move on now to what is communication. And I'm going to ask you this question. If you are standing alone in a forest of trees and speaking to yourself, are you communicating? Well, I don't believe you are, unless you are talking to the trees, believing the trees can understand you. Because communication is interactive. There needs to be a message and a way to understand the message, either by listening or reading. So let's think about communication as an interactive activity. Now we'll move on to what does good communication involve? Well, it involves good English plus knowing how to get your message across to other people in a natural, clear, and effective way. And also using body language to communicate. And body language, as we said with John, was having suitable facial expressions. That means the expressions on your face, your hand gestures, posture, etc. And communicating might involve just one person or an animal or other thing capable of understanding, or millions of people, just like with famous people giving a speech. Okay, now we're going to move on to a useful way of understanding communication. That's called an analogy, when we say that communication is like something else that we already know about. If good English is like the ingredients for cooking, then good communication is when you cook a meal that combines all the ingredients to make a really tasty dish that is perfect for the occasion. The meal suits the situation. Maybe it's a formal dish, just like Shabila's biryani for her birthday. It satisfies the taste of the people at the meal, and we know that they will enjoy that meal according to their background or their interests. So that's a good way of thinking about communication, is getting the ingredients of good English together and cooking it up into a situation that's going to suit the people that are listening to you or reading your words. Okay. Now, we are going to move to some very important tips for speaking and writing. And this is something I really want you to remember for the rest of your life, because it's really the foundation of good speaking and writing. Now, first of all, when I use the word tips, I'm talking about good advice. And my first tip is that you need to always prepare before you communicate something important. You need to understand what you are trying to achieve and have a clear purpose. A clear purpose means you have a clear idea of what you want to do, what you want to achieve, what you want to happen. You also need to understand something about the people you are communicating with, whether the people are listening to you, watching you, or reading your message or story. They are your audience. And I will use that word a lot for the people who you are communicating with. So once again, the three important things I want to tell you is to prepare, to have a clear purpose, and to understand your audience. Okay. Now I want to move on to a real life situation, something that happened to my husband and I just recently. We have new neighbors and they have a big dog that barks a lot when they leave the house. And my husband and I, we are retired and we spend a lot of time at home reading and writing. And this is very irritating and annoying for us to have a dog barking all day long. So, what should I do? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare my communication. I'm going to ask myself, what do I want to achieve by talking to my new neighbors? That's my purpose. And I should find out something about the people who have moved in next door. They are my audience. And I should ask myself, how will I communicate? Will I speak to them in person, face to face? Will I ring them on the phone? Or will I write them a letter? Well, let's see. I decided to use a 4-step guide, and this is a guide that has been developed by a professor at the University of Canberra. And what she discovered is that there are 4 good steps to communicating with by talking. And the first one is how to approach the neighbors. That means how you start the conversation. I decided I would talk to them. So I introduced myself and I told them that I needed to talk. That was my approach. That was the beginning of our conversation. Now, the next thing that the professor advises is to bridge the conversation with something pleasant or interesting. Now, you may say, what does that mean to bridge the conversation? And we all know that a bridge is something that helps people travel from one side of a mountain to another side of a mountain or across a river. But we all know that a bridge is trying to connect people when there's a gap. And these people are new to me. There is a gap in our knowledge. So I will have to say something quite pleasant or interesting to try to close that gap. The third thing that is advised is to communicate clearly. And in this case, I want to convince them to do something to stop their dog barking. And finally, I will leave them and politely say something nice so that they feel I'm a pleasant person and I'm not angry with them, but I would like to solve the problem. So that's easy. You can see it's easy to remember. A, B, C, D. Approach, bridge, communicate, depart. And that is the model that works really well. Okay, now we'll move on to the next slide because I think we've missed a slide there. If we can just go back one. Yep. Okay. Now, this, I'm going to tell you what I said to my neighbours using the ABCD model. So first I said, hi, I'm Anya, your neighbour. Welcome to the neighbourhood. And then I said, I hear you come from the same town where I was born. What brings you here? And that's an expression which means, tell me about the reasons you came here. Now, next, I said to the neighbours, I think we need to move forward a little bit. And one more, yes. And then I said, I just wanted to have a bit of a chat. That means a short talk about your dog. He seems to get upset when you leave and he barks a lot. We are retired, so we spend a lot of time at home. Do you think you could take him with you more often until he gets settled, or give him some treats before you leave? Would that work? And then finally I said, okay, well, thanks for the chat. We should get together for a cuppa. And that in Australia means have a cup of tea together and get to know each other. Bye, and the person's name. So you can see that I followed the ABCD model, which is quite logical, except that the B, the bridging part, is something that is a little different, but it's very important because that is the part that actually connects you with the person that you're talking to. So, in summary, let's think about what you have learned about communicating in English. Good communication involves more than good English. We know that. You will be effective and clear if you think about your purpose and audience before you speak. You should prepare before you speak. And if you use the ABCD model to guide your thoughts, it will be a great help to you. Okay. Now, I want you to think for a moment. Reflect means to think back on some of the important things you have spoken about in the last week. Perhaps it's a thank you to a friend. Perhaps it was an important message to a relative or neighbour. Maybe it was a complaint about something you bought at a shop. Maybe an invitation to a special event. Or maybe in Shabila's case, she had a chance to say something at her birthday party and thank the people for all their support. And now I want you to think, did you follow the ABCD model? Maybe your model is different in your culture. And if it is, just how different is it? And what would you see as the difference between the model I've given you and the way you decided to speak? That's something that we might discuss more after the presentation. Now, moving on finally, the discussion topic we're going to talk about is a time you communicated well. I want you to think about a time you were really proud about the way you spoke and the message you got across very effectively. Or if you want to, you could talk about a time that you wish you communicated better because maybe things didn't go very well. It doesn't matter whether it was in English or your own language, but I want you to think about what was the situation, whether you spoke well or whether you spoke with some problems that created a bit of tension. What was the situation? What happened? And why did it happen, do you think? And as we all know, the why question is an important part of learning how to do things better next time. So let's stop there and start to think about a time when you communicated well, or a time you wish you communicated better, what the situation was, where you were, what happened, what was the outcome, and why you think it happened. Okay, thank you very much for listening to me today.